A spoiled millionaire mocked his housemaid's dreams, until she showed up as the owner of the mansion. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the Grant estate, glinting off marble floors so clean they mirrored the crystal chandelier above. Lucas Grant, 32, heir to the Grant Holdings empire, lounged in a silk robe at the breakfast table, scrolling through his phone with the casual arrogance of someone who had never been told no. The smell of roasted coffee and freshly buttered croissants filled the air, but Lucas barely noticed. Across the room, a young woman knelt by the baseboards, quietly polishing the silver vents. Her name was Elena. She moved with care, her uniform simple, her dark hair tied in a low bun. When Lucas's reflection caught hers in the mirror, he smirked. "You've been here, 2 weeks? You work too hard for someone earning minimum wage." She didn't answer, only wiped another streak until the metal gleamed. On the counter beside him, a folded sketchbook peeked from under a cleaning rag. He reached for it, flipping it open. Pages of delicate pencil-drawing sunlight through trees. The old mansion, from a softer angle, met his gaze. "So the maid wants to be an artist," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Tell me, do you paint before or after scrubbing toilets?" His friends at the table laughed. Elena looked up, cheeks flushing, but her voice was steady. "Dreams don't ask for permission, sir." Lucas's laugh came sharp and dismissive. "Well, maybe you should ask for a reality check instead." The laughter echoed as she gathered her things and turned away, but Lucas's smirk faded as her quiet reply lingered in his mind. Later, he found himself pacing by the window, staring at the same sky she'd drawn in her sketchbook. He couldn't explain why it bothered him the way she didn't break, the way her eyes stayed kind even after his cruelty. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was something else. He didn't know yet. But the story of that morning, the spoiled millionaire and the maid he mocked, was only just beginning, and neither of them had any idea how their worlds were about to turn upside down. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the tall glass panels of the Grant mansion again, but this time the house felt quieter, almost uneasy. Lucas sat in his office, staring blankly at a stack of financial reports. Numbers and charts filled the screen, yet all he could see in his mind was Elena's steady gaze from the day before. He had mocked her in front of his friends, laughed at her dreams, and somehow that laughter did not taste as sweet as it used to. "Sir," the housemaid Elena asked for her day off. His butler informed him through the intercom. "Approve it," Lucas said quickly, almost relieved not to see her that morning. He did not understand why her presence had unsettled him so much. Maybe it was how she never defended herself, how she seemed to carry quiet pride even when humiliated. That evening, when the guests were gone and the mansion returned to its usual silence, Lucas walked past the utility room. The faint smell of lemon polish lingered in the air. On the counter sat a forgotten rag, a coffee mug, and the sketchbook he had tossed aside yesterday. Something made him stop. He hesitated before opening it again. The first page was a sketch of the very dining hall he had insulted her in, drawn with such precision it almost felt alive. The next page showed the old garden, sunlight spilling through branches, a single caption at the corner. "Dreams are free, but art is priceless." Lucas felt something twist in his chest. He closed the sketchbook and exhaled, a quiet, heavy sound that echoed in the empty room. Later that night, he poured himself a glass of scotch and stood by the window, looking out over the city lights. The skyline glittered with the empire his family had built, yet he had never noticed how cold it looked from up here. The next day, Elena returned to work. Lucas tried to act normal, keeping his tone polite but distant. "You draw well," he said finally, surprising even himself. Elena glanced up, cautious. "Thank you, sir. Do you sell them?" "No," she replied. "I draw to remember what used to be mine." Lucas frowned. "What do you mean?" Elena hesitated, then spoke softly. "This house. My father used to work for your father. We lived in the small guest house behind the west garden until it was torn down." Lucas blinked, caught off guard. "You lived here?" "Yes, before the company expansion. My father lost his job after the merger. He died a few months later." Her voice did not tremble. "I applied here because I wanted to see what became of the place we once called home." For a moment, Lucas had no words. He just stood there, the weight of her truth hanging in the air. That night he could not sleep. Her words echoed through the marble halls like a ghost. He walked down to the art room again and flipped to the last page of her sketchbook. It was unfinished, a portrait of the mansion itself, but half of it was drawn in charcoal ruins, the other half blooming with light. On the back of the page a note read, "Every house remembers its kindness." Lucas stared at it for a long time. The arrogance that had once defined him began to feel small, hollow, and undeserved. Somewhere between the echo of her words and the silence of his own thoughts, something inside him shifted. He did not know it yet, but that moment the spoiled millionaire standing alone in his own house, holding the maid's sketchbook, was the beginning of his redemption. Days turned into weeks, and though the rhythm of the mansion returned, something inside Lucas did not. The same marble floors, the same lavish dinners, the same laughter of his friends, it all sounded distant now, muted behind the echo of Elena's quiet words. He noticed things he had never cared about before. The way the staff avoided eye contact, the exhaustion in their faces, the silence that hung heavy whenever he entered a room. It bothered him more than he would admit. One late afternoon he stepped into the hallway and found Elena kneeling beside a broken vase. Shards of porcelain sparkled across the floor like tiny pieces of gilt. She was picking them up one by one, her fingers trembling slightly. "Leave it," Lucas said, kneeling down beside her before he realized what he was doing. She looked up in surprise. "Sir, I can handle it." "I know," he said quietly, "but maybe I should start fixing the things I break." For a moment, their eyes met as filled with awkward sincerity, hers with something unreadable. He helped her gather the pieces, careful not to cut his hands. When they were done, she gave a small nod, as if acknowledging a truth neither of them wanted to name. Later that week, Lucas returned home early from a board meeting. In the kitchen, he heard laughter, a soft, genuine sound he had not heard in a long time. Peering through the doorway, he saw Elena and the cook sharing a loaf of bread, joking in Spanish about burnt crusts. She was smiling, radiant in her simplicity, and for the first time Lucas realized how little warmth his wealth had ever bought him. The next morning, he told his assistant to cancel his weekend trip. Instead, he spent the day wandering through the Old West Garden, the same place she said her father used to work. Overgrown roses climbed the rusted fence, and in the dirt he could still see faint outlines of the old greenhouse foundation. He imagined a younger Elena running through here, her father pruning vines, both unaware of how quickly life could change. That night, Lucas did something he had never done before. He sat at his desk and began to draw. His lines were clumsy, uneven, but he kept going. When he finished, he stared at the paper, a crude sketch of the mansion, half light, half shadow, almost identical to hers. He left it on her work table the next morning with a note that simply said, "Teach me how to see." He did not expect an answer, but when he returned that evening, the note was gone and a clean page sat in its place. On it was written, "Only if you are willing to look beyond yourself." The following nights became an unspoken routine. He would leave his attempts, she would correct them in delicate red pencil lines. Slowly, he learned. He noticed how light curved on glass, how shadows softened corners, how color could make even emptiness feel alive. It was the first time Lucas Grant ever created something without buying it. One evening, as he walked past the gallery room, he found Elena standing before one of his sketches, studying it silently. He stopped at the doorway. "It is terrible, I know," he said. She smiled faintly. "No, it is honest. That is rarer than perfect." There was no sarcasm, no fear, only quiet respect. For the first time, Lucas felt seen not as a millionaire, not as a boss, but as a man still learning. He did not say it aloud, but he knew then he no longer saw her as just a maid. And though he did not yet realize it, that small change of heart was the first real stroke on the canvas of the man he was becoming. By the time autumn painted the garden in gold and rust, the atmosphere inside the Grant mansion had quietly transformed. Lucas had become a different kind of presence, still the owner, still wealthy, but somehow more human. He greeted the staff by name now, asked about their families, even helped the gardener plant new roses along the west fence. Yet no one changed him more than Elena. Their strange correspondence through sketches had grown into real conversations. Sometimes they spoke over coffee during her breaks, talking about art, loss, and what dreams looked like when money was not part of the equation. Lucas found himself waiting for those moments, though he would never admit it aloud. One afternoon, His business partner Richard arrived unexpectedly, bringing 2 investors from overseas. They wandered the halls, impressed by the grandeur of the mansion. "You really live like royalty," one of them laughed. Lucas smiled politely, but when he noticed Elena dusting a nearby shelf, Richard smirked. "You keep the help close, huh?" he joked. "You have a thing for maids now, Lucas." The words stung. Lucas's instinct was to defend her, but pride, that old familiar poison, tightened his throat. He forced a laugh. "She just cleans. Nothing more." Elena froze for a fraction of a second, then kept working, her face blank. The investors laughed, oblivious, but the sound hollowed the room. When they left, the silence between Lucas and Elena felt heavier than ever. That evening, she avoided his gaze, her eyes fixed on the floor as she gathered her supplies. "Elena," he began, "about what happened." "You do not have to explain, sir," she interrupted softly. "You told them the truth. I just clean." Her voice was calm, but the tremor beneath it cut deep. She walked out before he could say another word. That night, Lucas sat alone in his study, the lights dim, the unfinished sketch before him blurred by the weight of his own shame. He had spent years thinking respect could be bought, loyalty could be demanded, and now one careless sentence had shattered the fragile bridge he had been building. He barely slept. The next morning she was gone, her uniform folded neatly on the counter, her sketchbook missing from the table. The butler said she had resigned. Lucas drove through the city that afternoon, restless, his thoughts louder than the hum of the engine. He passed the art district, where banners fluttered for the upcoming annual gallery showcase, an event that supported independent artists. Out of habit, he parked and stepped inside the venue. The smell of fresh paint and varnish filled the air. Rows of canvases lined the walls, bursting with color and emotion. And then, near the center, he saw a familiar style soft pencil lines, light spilling through windows, and the unmistakable silhouette of the Grant mansion under the morning sun. The plaque beneath it read, "The House That Remembered," by Elena Morgan. Lucas froze, his breath caught, realization flooding through him. Morgan, her mother's maiden name. The small crowd around the piece whispered with admiration, completely unaware that the man standing behind them was the one who once mocked its creator. Lucas felt both proud and crushed at once. Without thinking, he approached the curator and asked quietly, "Is the artist here?" The woman smiled. "She will be. Tonight is her grand debut." Lucas nodded, his chest tight. As he left the gallery, the cool wind hit his face, carrying the scent of rain. He looked up at the gray sky and whispered, "I deserve this." For the first time in his life, the man who had everything realized how empty it all was without forgiveness. And somewhere in that realization, he knew he would do anything to make things right again. The evening of the gallery opening arrived, and the city glowed under a thin veil of rain. Cars lined the cobblestone street outside the Westbridge Art Hall, their headlights reflecting off puddles that looked like fragments of light scattered across the ground. Lucas stepped out of his black sedan, his heart pounding harder than it had in years. He was not here as the millionaire everyone admired. He was here as a man who had finally realized how much damage his pride had done. Inside, the hall was alive with soft jazz and murmured conversation. Guests in elegant attire admired the exhibits, sipping champagne under the golden chandeliers. Lucas scanned the crowd until he saw her. Elena stood near the front of the room, speaking to a journalist, wearing a simple white dress that made her look both fragile and strong at once. Her hair framed her face in soft waves, her calm confidence glowing brighter than any light in the room. For a moment, Lucas hesitated. The memory of his cruel words echoed in his mind. But then she turned slightly, and their eyes met. She froze, her lips parting in surprise, and for a second the noise of the room disappeared. "Elena," he said softly when he approached, his voice unsteady. "You were right. I was blind." She looked at him, guarded but composed. "You should not be here, Mr. Grant." "Maybe not," he admitted, "but I could not stay away. I came to see what I was too foolish to believe in." He glanced toward her artwork, the one titled, "The House That Remembered." "It is beautiful. It deserves to be here. It always did," she said quietly, and there was no anger in her tone, only distance. "You mocked it once. Now you admire it because everyone else does?" Lucas shook his head. "No, because I finally see what you saw. You did not need my approval. You just needed your freedom." The curator called her name from the stage. It was time for her speech. Elena turned to go, But Lucas reached into his coat and handed her a small envelope. "You do not have to open this now," he said, his voice trembling. "But it is not money. It is something I should have given you long ago, respect." She hesitated, then took it and walked to the podium. The room fell silent as she began to speak. "This collection," she said, "was inspired by a house I once knew. It taught me that beauty can survive cruelty, and that even walls remember kindness." Her eyes found Lucas in the crowd. "We are all capable of change, if we dare to face what we once were." When the applause erupted, Lucas slipped out quietly. Outside, the rain had stopped. He stood under the awning, staring at the wet pavement, unsure whether to feel relieved or broken. Moments later, footsteps approached. It was Elena. She held the envelope, now open, and inside was a single-page deed transfer, signed by him, returning the West Garden to her name. "The garden was yours," he said simply. "It always should have been." For the first time, her expression softened completely. "You cannot buy forgiveness, Lucas." "I am not trying to," he said. "I am trying to earn peace." She looked down at the paper again, her fingers trembling slightly, then whispered, "Maybe this is a start." The city lights flickered around them, and for the first time in years, Lucas smiled without pretense. The spoiled millionaire who once mocked a maid's dreams now stood humbled before the woman who taught him what worth truly meant. And though he did not know where life would take them next, he finally understood that redemption is not spoken, it is lived. In the weeks that followed the gallery opening, life began to shift in ways neither of them could have predicted. The news of Elena's success spread quickly. Her exhibition became the talk of the city, praised for its emotion and authenticity. Lucas watched it unfold from a quiet distance, proud yet unsure of his place in her world. For the first time in his life, he stayed silent, instead of trying to control the outcome. He no longer saw her as the maid who once served his coffee, but as a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ashes of everything he had taken for granted. One cold morning, as the first snow dusted the garden, Lucas stood by the window holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The mansion felt emptier than ever. He had returned the West Garden to her, but the rest of the house felt hollow, without the warmth she used to bring to it. The echo of her footsteps still lived in the marble halls. He wondered if forgiveness was too much to hope for. That afternoon, a letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was delicate, familiar. He tore it open, his pulse quickening. "Lucas," it began, "I do not know if peace can ever erase pain, but I believe in beginnings. If you truly meant what you said about change, then use what you have to create something good. Art should not stay locked in mansions. It should live among people who need hope." At the bottom was an address, the Community Art Center in the old industrial district. The next day, Lucas drove there. The building was small, weathered, its red bricks faded from years of neglect. Inside, he found Elena teaching a group of children, their laughter echoing through the paint-splattered walls. She turned when she saw him, surprise flashing across her face. "You came," she said softly. Lucas nodded. "I came to help." She studied him for a long moment, then handed him a small paintbrush. "Then start with this wall," she said, pointing to a bare section of plaster. For hours, they worked side by side, painting a mural of light breaking through clouds. The children watched, giggling as Lucas smeared blue paint on his sleeve. For the first time, he laughed freely. It felt good, simple, right. When the wall was done, Elena stepped back to admire it. "You are better than you think," she said. "No," he replied gently. "I am just finally seeing the world through your eyes." Over the following weeks, Lucas began funding the art center quietly, making sure no one knew his name was behind the donations. He visited often, helping where he could, learning to listen more than he spoke. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Elena found him cleaning brushes in the corner. "You really are different now," she said. Lucas smiled faintly. "Maybe you just reminded me what being human feels like." She looked at him, the faintest trace of warmth in her eyes. "Then do not forget it again." He nodded. "I will not." As they stood in the fading light, surrounded by laughter and color, something unspoken passed between them, not romance yet, but trust, fragile and real. For the first time, both of them felt free from the past. The spoiled millionaire had learned humility, and the housemaid who once dreamed in silence had found her purpose. The mansion that once symbolized pride was now just a building. What truly mattered was the art, the kindness, and the quiet connection they had built from forgiveness. The journey was far from over, but for Lucas and Elena, this was the beginning of something whole, a story not about power, but about grace. Winter deepened, wrapping the city in a hush of frost and pale morning light. The community art center had become a second home for Lucas, a place where his days no longer revolved around meetings or profits, but around small hands learning to draw, walls filling with color, and laughter echoing through the old building. Elena watched him change in real time. He no longer arrived in suits, but in rolled-up sleeves and paint-stained jeans, always the first to help and the last to leave. The children adored him, calling him Mr. L, though few of them had any idea who he really was. One Friday evening, as snowflakes danced outside the tall windows, Elena found Lucas sitting on the floor beside a broken easel, lost in thought. "It is just wood," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "We can fix it." Lucas looked up, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "It is not the easel. I was just thinking how strange it feels to care about something that does not make me richer." "That means you are finally alive," she replied. "Money never built a soul." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I spent 30 years not knowing that." Silence fell between them, comfortable and still. He noticed the light catching in her hair, the warmth in her eyes, and felt a pull he could no longer ignore. But before he could speak, the door creaked open. It was Richard, his old business partner, stepping into the paint-splattered room with a look of disbelief. "So this is where you have been hiding," Richard said, his tone half amused, half disgusted. "You trading boardrooms for finger paints now?" Lucas stood, his expression calm. "Richard, this is Elena. She runs the center." Richard's gaze swept over her with thinly veiled disdain. "Ah, the maid," he said, smirking. "The one who turned into an artist. How poetic." The words hit like a slap. The children went quiet. Elena's face remained composed, but her knuckles whitened around the paintbrush she was holding. Lucas stepped closer to Richard, his voice steady but firm. "Do not speak to her like that." Richard laughed. "Come on, Lucas. Do not tell me you are serious about this charity nonsense. You are missing board meetings, ignoring investors, and now you are defending the help." "She is not the help," Lucas said sharply. "She is the reason I am not the man you just described." The tension in the room was palpable. Richard scoffed. "You have lost your mind. You are throwing away everything your father built." "No," Lucas replied. "I am rebuilding what he never had a heart." He turned to Elena. "Excuse me for a moment." Then, facing Richard again, his tone grew colder. "Sell my shares if you want. I do not care. The company will survive without me, but I am done surviving without meaning." Richard stared at him, speechless, then stormed out, muttering something about wasted potential. The door slammed shut and silence returned. Elena exhaled slowly. "You just gave up your empire." Lucas smiled faintly. "No, I just gave up my prison." She looked at him for a long time, her eyes softening with something more than respect. "You really mean it, do you?" "Every word," he said. "You showed me what freedom looks like, Elena. It is not power. It is peace." For the first time, she smiled fully, the kind of smile that reaches the eyes. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in white. Inside, two souls stood quietly amid the scent of paint and new beginnings, knowing that whatever came next, they had already changed each other's worlds forever. Spring arrived quietly, bringing with it the soft scent of rain and new beginnings. The city thawed from winter's chill, and the community art center bloomed with color and life. Lucas spent nearly every day there now, his hands often stained with paint instead of ink. The old mansion still stood on the hill, but it was no longer his world. Down here, among laughter and creation, he had found something that wealth had never given him: purpose. One morning, Elena entered the center carrying a stack of donation letters. Her hair was tied loosely, a few strands brushing her face. Lucas looked up from the mural he was working on and smiled. "You are early," he said. "So are you," she replied with a playful smirk. "I thought millionaires liked to sleep late." "I am not that man anymore," he said. "Besides, the sun does not wait for arrogance." She laughed softly. "True." They worked in companionable silence for a while, until Elena spoke again. "We have been invited to showcase our program at the city's annual cultural gala next month. They want us to display the children's artwork." Lucas turned, surprised. "That is incredible." She nodded. "It is, but there is one problem: the event is being hosted at the Grant Mansion." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The mansion that once symbolized his pride and her pain now stood as a bridge between their past and their progress. "Then we will go," Lucas said finally. Together. The night of the gala arrived. Lights shimmered across the garden, music floated through the air, and guests filled the halls that had once echoed with cold laughter. Elena walked beside Lucas, both of them dressed simply yet elegantly, their presence drawing quiet attention. As they entered, conversations hushed for a moment. Some recognized him, the once untouchable heir. Others whispered about the woman who had turned scandal into art. The children's paintings lined the corridor, vivid and full of life. One depicted a bright garden under a golden sky, titled "The House That Changed." Guests paused to admire them, unaware of the deeper story behind every stroke. The curator approached them warmly. "Mr. Grant, Miss Morgan, thank you for agreeing to attend. Your foundation's work has inspired so many." Elena smiled. "It is the children who inspire us." Lucas nodded in agreement. Later that evening, during the speeches, the host invited them to the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer said, "tonight we celebrate not just art, but transformation. Please welcome the founders of the New Light Foundation, Lucas Grant and Elena Morgan." Applause filled the hall. Lucas took the microphone, his voice calm but heartfelt. "Once, I believed success was measured by what you could own. I was wrong. True success is what you can give back. Every child who paints in that center has taught me more about life than I learned in any boardroom." He paused, turning to Elena. "And one woman taught me that humility is not weakness, but strength." The audience erupted again, many unaware of how literal his words were. When the speeches ended, the music swelled, and the guests mingled once more. Outside on the terrace, the night air was warm, the city lights shimmering below. Elena stood beside him, watching the garden where her father once worked. "We have come full circle," she whispered. "Yes," Lucas said softly. "But this time we own nothing, and somehow that feels richer." She smiled, and in that moment, everything between them felt simple and right. They had rewritten their story not with money or revenge, but with understanding and grace. The spoiled millionaire and the maid he once mocked now stood as equals beneath the same stars, no longer bound by the past but connected by what they had built together, something far greater than wealth could ever buy. As the gala drew to a close, and the last guests began to leave, the mansion stood bathed in a soft golden glow. The laughter, that once sounded shallow here, now carried warmth and sincerity. Lucas walked through the familiar halls, every painting and polished surface holding a memory, some heavy with regret, others shimmering with newfound peace. Outside, Elena stood on the terrace, the night wind brushing gently against her hair as she looked over the garden that had once been her family's. The roses were in full bloom again, vibrant under the moonlight. When Lucas stepped beside her, she smiled faintly without turning. "I never thought I would see this place like this again," she said softly. "Not as a servant, not as a stranger, but as someone who finally belongs." Lucas looked at her, his voice low. "It was always your home, Elena. I just did not see it until you showed me what home truly means." She glanced at him then, her eyes reflecting the light like calm water. "You have changed, Lucas. I did not think you could." "Neither did I," he said with a quiet laugh. "But you proved that even the most broken man can start again if he learns to listen." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the city below blending with the faint sound of music drifting from inside. Then Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a worn sketchbook. "I believe this belongs to you," he said. Elena froze, recognizing it instantly. It was the one she had left behind the night she quit. The pages were slightly frayed, but the cover still bore her initials. "You kept it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every page," he replied. "It reminded me of who I was before I forgot how to feel." She took it from his hand carefully, her fingers brushing his. "You never finished the last drawing," he said. "The mansion was only half in the light." Elena opened to the final page and smiled. "Maybe that is because it was waiting for you to change." She reached for a pencil resting on the terrace table and, with slow, deliberate strokes, completed the drawing. Together they watched the outline of the mansion transform into one bathed fully in light. "Now it is complete," she whispered. Lucas nodded, his throat tight. "So are we." The next morning, headlines spoke of the success of the gala and the generosity of the New Light Foundation. But for Lucas and Elena, no newspaper could capture what had truly changed. They continued their work at the art center, turning it into a haven for underprivileged youth, a place where dreams were painted into existence. Years later, when the old Grant Mansion was donated to the foundation and reopened as a community museum, the main exhibit was called The House That Remembered, featuring works from both of them side by side. Visitors often lingered at one particular painting near the entrance, a sketch of a man and woman standing in a garden of roses, looking toward a bright horizon. Beneath it was a single inscription: "Forgiveness builds what pride destroys." Lucas and Elena never sought fame for what they had done, but their story became one whispered among those who believed in second chances. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, they would walk through that same garden, hand in hand, no longer burdened by who they used to be. The spoiled millionaire and the housemaid he once mocked had become equals, partners, and something more. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Elena turned to him and said with a smile, "Do you remember what you told me that night at the gallery?" Lucas nodded, smiling back. "Yes," he said. "I told you I was trying to earn peace." She leaned her head gently against his shoulder. "And you did, Lucas. You did." The story of the mansion ended not with power or revenge, but with understanding, humility, and love, the kind that does not fade, the kind that changes everything.